nothing on the Chick-fil-A website that is in any way offensive to anybody. It's very benign.
Man, right here, George Brauchler, 710 KNUS, going to go to the VIP line. He is my congressman. Got a chance to spend a little bit of time with him at that awesome memorial event in Parker, and then he flitted off to like 8 others out there in the area. Congressman Ken Buck, sir, thanks for joining us.
It's good to be with you, George.
Now, you are incredibly supportive of the debt ceiling deal that Biden and McCarthy have made. Tell us about it.
No, I'm not incredibly supportive, and in fact, I'm voting against it. I think it'll come up sometime tonight. I'm in D.C. right now, but yeah, it's a disaster, and it's just one in many disasters that we've had in terms of debt ceilings. I've never voted for a debt ceiling increase in my 8.5 years in Congress, but this adds $4 trillion to the national debt. And for anybody to call it a victory, a win, historic achievement, just nonsense. It's a terrible bill.
How does it add the $4 trillion? Just by increase? And by the way, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think it actually increases it. It just suspends it or something until we can get past the presidential election.
Right. So what it does is we're incurring debt every day in this country, and it sets a time limit for the next debt bill to come due. So usually what happened probably 10 years ago or more, they set a dollar amount. So we'll give the administration $1 trillion, and when you run through that, you need to come back to Congress and ask for another debt ceiling increase. Now they just do it by time. So the administration can incur as much debt as it wants until January of 2025. That blank check is just something the American people shouldn't have to write or pay for.
What do you expect to happen in January? Let's say that happens. What happens in January of 2025?
Well, this is why the Democrats and the administration really were thinking and used this to their advantage. In January 2025, if Biden gets reelected in November, God forbid, if Biden gets reelected in November, then he starts negotiating the debt ceiling deal with Congress, and depending on whether the Democrats or Republicans have won, he is able to increase the debt ceiling. If Trump or another Republican candidate wins in November of 2024, they have to wait until January 20th to be sworn in. So the first thing that they will be dealing with, rather than whatever their agenda is in terms of the economy or foreign policy, but the first thing they're going to have to deal with is this debt ceiling politics, really, that goes on, and all the threats of a crisis.
When you look at this from the standpoint of, as a guy who's never voted for the debt ceiling increase, and that includes under Trump, and by the way, a bunch of Republicans did. As you know, the debt ceiling was increased under Trump a bunch of times too. If you were, I'm going to put you in the position of being Speaker Ken Buck. If you're Speaker Ken Buck and you have this thing in front of you, this debt ceiling issue, it's percolating, it's coming up on this June 1st, whatever it is, the deadline. And I should ask you, by the way, do you think the debt ceiling thing is a big deal? Like I had heard President Trump at some CNN, maybe it was CNN, where he said, hey, my advice would be we just need to default on it and figure out how to move forward after that. Where are you on that, and what would a Speaker Ken Buck use this issue for to get out of the Dems or the president?
Well, so we had, and this was John Boehner, and he was, very controversial with conservatives. But John Boehner, after Obamacare passed, and there was a debt ceiling issue, John Boehner got caps negotiated with the Democrats. So discretionary spending, which really is defined as everything that's not Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, sort of programs that for some reason Congress a long time ago took off the table. But all of the programs like the Department of Education, Department of Defense, all those programs are in the discretionary spending category. And John Boehner put caps on that. You cannot increase by more than 1%, by more than 2%. And that required the agencies to actually come back to Congress and say, okay, if this is how much money we have to spend, this is how we want to spend it. and there was some efficiency, and it really slowed the growth of government at that point. But when President Trump took over, Democrats were happy to take those caps off, and Republicans wanted to take those caps off for President Trump. So this has really been a bipartisan problem. But to answer your question, I would put the caps back on. I would require each program to only grow by a small percentage, less than the growth in the gross domestic product. And so we would see an actual, in real dollar terms, an actual decrease in discretionary spending.
Is that different than what this deal is touted to having accomplished, which is having non-defense spending kept relatively flat and then increasing all the other stuff only by about 1% in 2025? Is what you're saying different than that?
Yeah, it is different, George. Defense spending goes up pretty significantly, and as does spending on veterans programs. But you can't accumulate $4 trillion of debt without increasing spending in all those other programs. So what they're doing is they've got these pots of money that are sitting there from COVID, from other areas, and they will just be spending those down. So the spending actually will increase. It just is a smaller appropriation from the government. But the national debt is this huge, in 18 months, $4 trillion.
Is that what you describe with the COVID fund spending as a way to make it seem like it's not an additional appropriation? Is that part of that $28 billion that this deal purportedly claws back from the unspent COVID funds?
Yeah, but it's $28 billion of, first of all, it was $4 trillion that was, and even more. There were several bills, but the largest was a $4 trillion bill.
I remember that.
And so you've got this huge amount of money sitting out there, and they brought back $28 billion of that, which is great, but it's $28 billion of how many hundreds of billions that are still sitting out there.
We're talking with Congressman Ken Buck from the 4th Congressional District in Colorado. Sounds like he's going to vote tonight against the debt ceiling deal that McCarthy and Biden put together. Another question, there's a part of this thing that I've heard Speaker McCarthy say, hey, look at this, we got these work requirements put back in for folks that take certain benefits from the government. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's part of the Farm Bill, and it's always been a big issue because the so-called Farm Bill, 15% of it is actually agricultural programs. The other 85% are food stamp and welfare programs. And so I'm not sure why they call it the Farm Bill, only because in D.C. they use terms that they think sell better. But the idea a few years ago was that those work requirements would decrease the number of people on food stamps, and at the same time get people back into the workforce. The CBO score on that particular program, because they do a number of things, they increase ages, but the CBO score indicates that more people will be on food stamps than before. So the idea that this is some major breakthrough, again, is just smoke and mirrors.
The provision that seems to cut back or says it cuts back on funding for some IRS stuff. Thoughts on that?
Yeah. So the Democrats, when they had control of the House and the Senate and the White House, passed legislation that would fund 87,000 new IRS employees. And they alleged that those employees would only be auditing, investigating tax returns for individuals filing $400,000 of income or more.
And Republican congressmen.
Yeah, that's right. And when they were questioned about that, they admitted, no, that's not the case. The middle class will be targeted also in this effort. So the amount of money, I think we could go from 87,000 to 85,000 new employees under this bill. So there will still be a very large increase in the IRS, and that will, again, be a burden on Americans.
In looking at this bill, is there something, I know it's not enough to get your yes vote, but is there something that you can say, I think this was a good accomplishment, this was a win?
Oh, I think all the things that you've mentioned are good accomplishments. What you have to balance them against is the $4 trillion of additional debt. George, at some point, we can't sustain this. And China right now is going around the world. We're getting intelligence reports, non-classified intelligence reports, showing that China is now going around the world telling countries, look, you can count on us. We're financially stable. The U.S. is now, going to have $35 trillion of debt, and they just can't sustain that. And we are losing not just here at home, where interest rates will rise. The more money, as you know, the more money you put into the economy, the federal government puts into the economy, the higher inflation goes. The higher inflation, the Fed has to increase interest rates. So we're going to see higher interest rates for a period of time as a result of all this government spending.
Best guess, given your position, I've also seen Congresswoman Lauren Boebert. She's opposed to this. I don't know where Doug Lamborn is on it. But does McCarthy have the votes to get this thing through the House?
Oh, yeah, the Democrats are going to be voting for it. They will get an overwhelming percentage of Democrats voting for this bill. And that's why when Republicans' leadership is talking about how this is a huge win, if it's such a huge win, there wouldn't be an overwhelming Democrat support for this bill. As Ted Cruz tweeted out yesterday, there are 4 trillion reasons that Democrats will be voting for this bill, and they will.
If we were in a position where it was either this compromise or default, would it be better for the country if this bill failed and then try to figure out what to do next, or to have this bill in place?
So George, the alternative is a $500 billion, $800 billion clean debt ceiling increase, and 3 months, 2 months of figuring out what to do next. The alternative is not paying the debt. The Republicans in Congress would be happy to give this administration a temporary period of time. Now, this administration refused to negotiate. Biden didn't allow his team to go to the negotiating table until just a couple weeks ago. So they could have avoided where we are right now if they had wanted to. But I don't think the alternative is defaulting. The alternative is just a temporary, short-term debt ceiling increase.
So I see, just to be clear, and I think I see what you're saying, is there was an ability there to agree to a bill that would have just bought extra time. Didn't change the debt ceiling. We would have just covered whatever our costs were up through a period of time to give the administration and Congress the ability to have more runway to try to negotiate something that was a better deal for Americans.
Absolutely. The first alternative was for the Biden administration to come to the table earlier. The second alternative now, if this bill, it's going to pass, but if it didn't pass tonight, the alternative is just to write a bill that says we will agree to increase the debt ceiling by $500 billion. That gives us weeks or months, and during that time, negotiate something like the caps that I was mentioning.
When you look at what's going on in just the House caucus, the Republican caucus in the House, and you hear the things, the murmurs here, there, and everywhere, I know that Dan Bishop has come out and said, hey, I don't think Speaker McCarthy ought to be Speaker McCarthy anymore. Is this bill going to cause some sort of a revolt, maybe too strong of a word, but you know what I mean? Is this the kind of thing that's going to trigger the vote of no confidence provision of whatever that agreement was that Kevin got into in order to become Speaker? Is it that kind of a thing?
Well, he promised 2022 numbers, appropriation numbers. So, excuse me, he agreed to go back 1 year and cap spending at that level. This agreement breaks that. And so he gave a few promises.
Bless you.
He gave a few promises. I must be allergic to D.C.
It's a swamp, you know.
Yeah, it is. He gave a few promises to make sure that that he got the votes to become Speaker, and one of those promises was sort of a self-imposed spending cap He's blown through that now, and so people are now saying, well, if he's not keeping the promise that caused us to vote for him, should we re-examine that vote? I think that's not going to happen today. It's not going to happen this week. But at some point, people are going to come together and ask that question.
Are you one of those people that's going to ask that question?
I'm going to ask the question, yeah. I am not I haven't taken a position on that issue at this point. I think Kevin has some explaining to do in terms of the appropriations process that will be coming up in the next few months.
Overall, is this, and I know each side always claims victory, is this a win for Republicans, or do you feel like, did Biden get the better of McCarthy? I mean, if you were going to characterize this, and I'm not giving you only those two options. I mean, you describe it however you want.
Yeah, one of my colleagues from South Carolina, Nancy Mace, said that Republicans were owned by a guy who can't even find his pants, which I thought was kind of humorous. But to me, it's clearly not a win for America. I don't know if it's, McCarthy considers it a win for Republicans and Biden considers it a win for Democrats. America does not win when we add $4 trillion to the national debt.
Do you feel like Biden came up, whoever, and by the way, I don't believe he's the guy negotiating. I mean, there's clearly people behind him that are helping make things move and all that other stuff. But do you feel like they got the better of the deal, they being the White House?
Well, they got to the end of this term a blank check to spend as much money as they want, and the debt will be covered, and that is a huge win for them. I think what we want to do is we want to have a debt vote every 4 or 5 months, so that America can understand that this administration is spending at such a high rate that we're burning through $1 trillion every 4 or 5 months of debt, and that at that point people will understand we need a more responsible government in the executive branch.
I can't thank you for taking time out of your busy morning out there fighting the good fight to have the conversation with us. I learned some stuff in this conversation. I imagine others did too. We'll look forward to see what happens after this. But Congressman Ken Buck from Colorado's 4th, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, George. Good to be with you.
Thank you.